everything is possible, but Russians are extremely, extremely good at playing this. They never say openly that they're not ready for the peace negotiations, but at the same time they issue different demands, different nuances. This is so typical and so classic if we're talking about Putin, if we're talking about Russians. One thing that our dear viewers must remember at all times is that peace negotiations are not part of Russian strategy.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're joined by Operator Starsky, a Ukrainian military veteran, observer at UATV, and co-founder of the Propaganda Study Institute. Operator Starsky, welcome.
Hello, thank you very much for invitation.
I wanted to start with Donald Trump's doubling down on this mineral deal that he's been pushing for. How is the updated version being read in Kiev?
So it raises a lot of questions because I believe last week already he talked that he's completely satisfied with the current edition that he had 1 week ago, and he was ready to sign it. And now we can see new additional details emerging in this mineral deal, which basically reads that the US will be able to take not only the rare minerals, but generally speaking, all minerals plus oil and gas and everything that is found there. And it's completely ridiculous, in my opinion. Again, we can see absolutely zero security guarantees for Ukraine. But generally speaking, Trump already mentioned that you should not look at this deal as some sort of security guarantees, like there will be American companies there, so Russians will not do anything to Ukraine if we're there, which is a lie, because we already seen hundreds of American companies working in Ukraine, and currently they're either occupied or looted, those that are on the occupied territories. So it makes absolutely no sense to us to sign this deal. Additionally, there is a risk that because of this deal, there might be problems for Ukraine in terms of joining the European Union, and that is one of the biggest priorities for us at this point. So I don't see any reason for our president to sign it at this point. Apparently, it will have to be changed involving Ukraine's interests.
Well, meanwhile, Kiev has called for the US and Europe to respond to this spate of Russian drone and air strikes that we've seen in the last few weeks. How intense is the Russian air campaign getting?
It intensified. Russians changed their strategy since last year. Currently, they involve much more strike drones. The number of those strike drones raised from 50, 70 to 150, 170. In some cases, more than 200 drones are used during each strike, which is, again, very interesting moment because according to the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Presidential Office of Ukraine, Mr. Zhovkva, Russians refused to discuss the halt of long-range strikes on Ukrainian civilian objects. So they only discussed the issue of striking like oil refineries, of course, because Russia relies on their oil industry, gas transferring units and things like that, but not the civilian objects in Ukraine. One of the reasons they keep striking civilian objects specifically is literally, and again, a lot of our viewers often ask, why would Russians strike civilian objects in Ukraine? Why would they strike hospitals and kindergartens and apartment buildings? It makes absolutely no sense to them. But the very, very simple answer to that is that Russians strike civilian objects because they want to stretch Ukraine's air defense. We have a lot of different industries and strategic facilities and enterprises that are well protected by the air defense, but because we understand that they will also strike cities like Kryvyi Rih, for example, remember 2023, 2024, there were very, very much atrocious strikes on Kryvyi Rih, even though there's absolutely nothing there. Like Kryvyi Rih is basically a city. There's a lot of mines around this city, some steel enterprises, but generally speaking, nothing worth strategic attention in strategic standpoint. So they were striking civilian cities literally in order to stretch our air defense and make those strategic objects less protected. Because again, we cannot ignore the value of human life of our civilians, so we have to protect them as well. So that is one of the reasons why they intensify those strikes these days, especially considering the fact that there are currently issues with our US partners in terms of delivering missiles for our air defense, and possibility that such aid will be delivered in the future. Recently, Donald Trump said that there will be no more free support for Ukraine, but the question is, will there be any support for Ukraine at all?
And you worked for some time in an air defense battalion, didn't you? Am I right to think?
I didn't work in the air defense battalion, but I had guys in my brigade who worked in the air defense units and the mobile groups, and they were often involved in protecting the sky over Kiev, Kiev Oblast, Bucha, Irpin, and Hostomel.
So, what sort of equipment could Ukraine's European allies, for example, send now that would help with this air defense battle?
There's a lot of equipment. First of all, of course, we're talking about missiles and land-based or mobile-based machine guns, uh, preferably, of course, with some kind of guiding systems that can improve the efficiency of intercepting the Russian drones. In terms of missiles, we don't see many strikes involving cruise and ballistic missiles. However, they still happen, not as massively as previously. One of the reasons is that some of the biggest Russian stockpiles in Engels air base was recently destroyed, and those missiles were stockpiled and actually planned to be used in 2 or 3 upcoming strikes that luckily didn't happen. But speaking of drones, those are slow flying targets, and they are cheap, right? Cheap to produce. Russians are producing them in massive numbers, and of course, spending some extremely valuable and expensive missiles like Patriot missiles, that will be not really. Uh, of course, I cannot justify it by price because we're still protecting human lives. But the problem is that we can spend them easily, and then we will have no more missiles left in the stockpile, neither in Ukraine nor on the West. So we got to be extremely cautious with that. So I think we will be involving other new technologies in order to strike those drones. For example, our partners from Europe recently announced that there will be new missiles implemented. They are again cheaper to produce. They have shorter range, but they are perfect for intercepting such targets as Russian Shahed drones. So apparently, we will see that in Ukraine very, very soon.
And as part of this campaign, there is ongoing strikes on infrastructure, civilian and energy infrastructure. Both sides are, of course, accusing each other of violating this infrastructure ceasefire, which Kiev has essentially put forward. But Russia hasn't actually agreed to any infrastructure ceasefire yet, has it?
Let's put it this way: no agreement was signed, right? But at the same time, we have official statement coming from Putin himself on the website of the Russian dictator that as soon as he talked with President Trump on 18th of March, which is 2 weeks ago, he ordered his troops to stop striking Ukrainian energy infrastructure, which we didn't see happening actually. And by the way, what Mr. Witkov said about Russians shooting down 7 of their own drones. First, it was a lie. They didn't shoot down their own drones. And second, even if, in a parallel reality, they shot down 7 drones, 170 other drones went towards Ukraine, towards Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. So we don't have any agreement yet with Russians since 18th of March, no matter what they state, because they state that, yes, this agreement is active and it's already running. And Putin himself confirmed this on his own official website of the Russian president. So it's there. But as we can see, in reality, it doesn't work. That very night, when he had a phone call with President Trump, Russian drones hit energy facilities in near Kramatorsk in Slovyansk. And also recently, we had reports of striking the energy infrastructure in the area of Dnipro as well. Also, we have reports coming from Kharkiv. So as we can see, it doesn't work. But, frankly speaking, I'm not surprised at all, because this is exactly the way Russians are acting since 2014, since Minsk agreements. They never respect those agreements. Recent study showed that Russians violated almost 200 agreements that they made, and this is their typical way of doing business. They never respected their own agreements, which again is our biggest concern when we talk with our allies, for example, allies that participate in the peace negotiations, because we, as Ukrainians, we understand that Russian agreements never work. There must be a different approach made to make them respect their word.
So, obviously, we don't have insights into the Russian chain of command necessarily, but uh, there's no chance of this being some sort of command and control issue, Putin struggling to control his military. This really is just Kremlin doublespeak.
Yes, yes, absolutely. It's not like Russian soldiers don't obey, their Tsar. It's actually a big myth made in Russia to justify all kinds of crimes and nefarious activities committed by Putin, because Russians are always taught that Russian Tsar is good, he's the god, he loves you, and like respect your Tsar. But his team, they always have problems. His team likes to set him up all the time. So it's a big myth. It's a big misconception about Russian command.
Mm. Well, elsewhere in this conflict, Ukraine is continuing its battle in Kursk with Russian forces there. It's now finding itself in something of a fighting retreat. It might seem. What do we know about that front in Kursk, and also the incursion into Belgorod as well?
Yeah, well, the biggest mystery that we can currently observe in the area of Kursk is that for the past two weeks, we're trying to locate those 5,000 Ukrainian troops surrounded in Kursk by Russians without any luck whatsoever. We don't even know if they exist. Apparently, they don't. Um, and apparently, President Trump was notified about it by his own intelligence, which is the strongest intelligence in the world. But at the same time, I'm not sure why he doesn't trust his intelligence services. I would if I were him. So that is one of the biggest misconceptions about Kursk at this very point. They keep, playing the game of like distorted reality, talking about soldiers that are not there. Russian bloggers themselves already several times confirmed that there are no Ukrainian troops surrounded in Kursk, but they just keep talking about it. I don't know. Maybe there's some higher sense behind it, but at the same time, we've heard several several rumors, right, coming from the Belgorod Oblast. How did it start? So the simple explanation: there was a Russian reconnaissance and sabotage group trying to infiltrate Ukraine from the Belgorod Oblast. They were eliminated on the Ukrainian territory. And currently, what is happening there is again is covered with the fog of war. We cannot say definitely, a lot of disinformation in the informational space regarding this very topic. One of the explanations that may be possible is that Ukrainians are trying to stretch, if they are there, of course, maybe some other army, I don't know, maybe like Macedonians or Greek, or I don't know. But maybe that allegedly Greek army there is trying to stretch Russian troops that are currently highly concentrated in the neighboring oblast, that is Kursk. And we can see similar strategy utilized by Russians, so-called strategy of 1,000 cuts, because they concentrate a lot of their troops along the whole front line, trying to push in different direction. Currently, there are four most, I would say, most intense spans of the front line. We're talking about Sumy, north of Sumy, where Russians incurred Ukrainian territory for the first time since 2022. Apparently trying to cut Ukrainian troops from the Kursk Oblast. We're talking about Donetsk, especially Chasiv Yar and Konstantinivka, and we're also talking about Zaporizhia, north of Robotyne, and Dnipro. So Russians intensified their offensive operations there at this point.
I just want to bring to your attention a breaking line that's come from NBC News interviewing Donald Trump. He's said that he is very angry and has used an expletive to describe his anger with Vladimir Putin over comments he's made about President Vladimir Zelensky not being legitimate and trying to push for elections. And on top of that, he said, if Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it was Russia's fault, which it might not be, but if I think it was Russia's fault, I am going to put secondary tariffs on oil, on all oil coming out of Russia. Is do you think we are going to get to the point soon where Russia are not able to keep, as Ukraine would certainly see it, stretching out negotiations and trying to put off this idea of a ceasefire? Is that, do you think, especially after hearing these comments from Donald Trump, is that going to reach a point where Trump will turn around and give more support to Ukraine and put more pressure on the Russians?
Everything is possible, since 2022, even like earlier, since 2014, we've seen all kinds of crazy things happening around Ukraine regarding Russian invasion. Russians are extremely effective at stretching those negotiations. Again, talking about Minsk agreements that lasted since 2014 until 2022, and especially when President Zelensky became a president and organized the most massive ceasefire that was possible in 2019, heavily criticized, by the way, by people like me back in those days. However, now I can see the sense behind it, because back in those days our artillery was moved back, our armored vehicles were moved back from the front lines, and it gave us opportunity to show the whole world that the Russians, instead of preserving and respecting this ceasefire, instead of that, they were digging trenches closer and closer to us, literally shortening the distance between our positions on a daily basis, because they knew that we would not shoot them. So um, everything is possible, but Russians are extremely, extremely good at playing this. They never say openly that they're not ready for the peace negotiations, but At the same time, they issue different demands, different nuances. This is so typical and so classic if we're talking about Putin, if we're talking about Russians. One thing that our dear viewers must remember at all times is that peace negotiations are not part of Russian strategy. Um, the best way to understand Russian strategy is to look at the Istanbul Protocol, Istanbul demands of Ukraine's capitulation, proposed by Russians back in 2022, where they talk about Ukrainian regions handed to Russia, when they talk about the expansion of the foreign and alien Russian culture on Ukrainian land, when they're talking about no NATO, no European Union, no international troops on Ukrainian territory, and basically Ukrainian army decreased to 50,000 troops, which is so funny. They do it not because they are afraid that like 51,000 troops would attack Russia and do some damage. No, they do it because they want to invade and they want to capture the whole territory. So Russian strategy towards Ukraine is literally disassembling of Ukraine, literally elimination of Ukraine's identity, and turning Ukraine into a new version of like Belarus, like a buffer land. Um, so peace talks are not part of Russian strategy. They don't benefit Russians in any way. The only reason I can see that they can benefit Russians is that they can increase their stockpile of weaponry. They can find some additional armored vehicles to replace their losses, because their um, uh, storages of those vehicles on the Russian territory are depleting very, very fast, faster than they can produce. And that can benefit them. On the other hand, there are currently talks in the European Union about deploying the peacekeeping troops on the territory of Ukraine, which will make further Russian strikes and offensives on the Ukrainian territory basically impossible. It's like it's a matter of discussion, actually, because I believe that our European partners also must understand a lot of different nuances about deploying their troops. For example, United Kingdom deploys their peacekeepers to Donbass. Let's imagine this. And those peacekeepers are stationed on a military base or in some different facility that is being hit by Russian missiles, killing several servicemen. What will be the reaction from the United Kingdom? Will they call for fifth article to be activated or not? What will be their reaction? Or France, for example. And will there be any reaction whatsoever? So it's an extremely important question, because there must be a roadmap. There must be a plan of action, what to do in case they strike. Will UK strike back? Will they counterattack the Russian troops? Is it possible? Is it something that we want? Is it something that you consider possible? So that is another thing. But in case there are peacekeepers on the Ukrainian territory, there is still chance that Russians will also be scared to attack them. I would give like 30% chance of that they will be scared. And if this works, it means that Russians will not be really interested again in having peace negotiations, because if it happens, it will decrease the chance of further Russian attacks on Ukraine.
And I do want to come on more to what more support Europe may be willing to provide. But just again on those comments that we're just hearing now from Donald Trump, I mean, is it reassuring for you, after what's been quite a bumpy relationship between Ukraine and the US, to hear Donald Trump acknowledge that Putin is not going in the right direction on this? That's a quote from President Trump.
He already made that statement as soon as he became a president. As soon as he became a president, he made that publication in his social media that he respects Russia so much, but Russia, that tends to lose millions of people in every war, will unfortunately be harmed if if they don't cooperate. But after that, we saw literally a lot of things, not really confirming this. We saw Trump calling President Zelensky a dictator. We saw that absolutely disgraceful conflict in the Oval Office and all those ridiculous questions why he's not wearing suits. And we saw um, the negotiators. We saw Witkov talking about Putin, who wants peace so much, and he's such a good friend with Donald Trump that he literally prays for him. So I would talk about actions. Okay, what are the actions? The actions that we have seen coming from Donald Trump was literally cutting aid for Ukraine, cutting intelligence, which basically resulted in Ukraine's troops uh, having to withdraw from the Kursk region because American intelligence was crucial for them at that moment, which also happened so coincidentally. Russians managed to deploy enough men in that territory in such a short period of time, which I don't really believe in coincidences, right? And also the massiveness of the Russian airstrikes on Ukraine increased that very moment when President Trump cut the aid to Ukraine, speaking also about the surface to air missiles to intercept Russian missiles and drones. So those were the actions that we saw, like physical actions, right? If we're talking about the narratives, we all can hear the narratives, and when they have some sort of, I don't know, grudge with Putin in the social media, I'm not even sure how to talk about it. Analyzing Donald Trump is a torture. I'm sorry.
Well, as I said, I'm keen to come back onto the support Europe could provide for Ukraine. Um, there's now discussions that European intelligence sharing could be expanded with Kiev. How useful could that be for the Ukrainian military?
I would say that could be extremely useful. For example, all the data provided by the European reconnaissance aircraft, European satellites, is extremely important on a more global scale, on tactical and operational scale. Actually, Ukrainian intelligence is pretty good. On the ground, we receive a lot of important data using our resources. But more globally, of course, we will not be able to receive like real-time satellite data coming from the United States, which cannot be replaced. But on the other hand, I believe that our European colleagues will ramp up our cooperation in terms of intelligence, and it will be beneficial for us. I really expect our European colleagues also to ramp up their military production, because one of the risks that we're facing right now, that is not about intelligence, but it's about literally 155 millimeter shells. So we will either need more shells coming from our European allies, or we will need to try to supplant them with strike drones, which is not really possible, because again, there are cases when a simple 155 millimeter shell that is unguided, that flies at a predictable trajectory, is much more effective than a drone.
Well, I just wanted to finish on these warnings we're now starting to hear, reportedly from Ukraine and its allies, that a new Russian offensive is imminent. That there could be one last big push by the Russians before some sort of ceasefire is effectively forced upon them. Um, are we expecting Russia to kind of suddenly adapt to modern warfare, maneuver warfare, or is this really a warning that we're just going to see another intensification of that grinding, sort of meat grinder style conflict that Russia has now committed itself to?
We will see two things. First of all, we will see again increasing number of airstrikes, and we will also see more meat assaults committed by Russians. They managed to recruit, that is according to Russian sources, approximately 440,000 men, and those men will be sent into a meat assault, which Russia doesn't really rely on, effective tactics and everything else. They rely more on the manpower, literally the sheer amounts of people that they can burn in a single meat assault in order to capture several more square kilometers of the territory in the area on a daily basis. So we will see that. We will see the meat assaults intensifying. I don't really see them using more armored vehicles and tanks because their stockpile is depleting very fast, and they have to be very cautious with losing those. And currently, the amount of drones that are being operated by the Ukrainian defenders is overwhelming. We're operating a lot of new fiber optic drones controlled via fiber optic cable. So they are also extremely effective in deflecting Russian attacks. According to what the guys from the ground saying, Russians can rarely approach Ukrainian position at a distance that would be shorter than 200, 300 meters. And basically at 200, 300 meters, that is an effective range of using smaller arms. So um, maybe we will see them using more donkeys and horses. Maybe some bionic creatures deployed. I don't know. It's again, it's really hard to imagine what sort of ridiculous stuff the Russians will introduce this time. But one thing remains clear is that they keep relying on their meat assaults, because even though it's completely atrocious and inhumane, but Russians consider this tactic as something effective, something that really brings them some kind of result, even though it's slow and I would say extremely not cost effective. But that's what they do.
Well, Operator Starsky, thank you very much for joining us today on Frontline.
Thank you so much.